He abandoned his true love for a millionaire lifestyle. Now, years later, a heartbreaking truth will change everything he thought he knew. Richard, a young and ambitious millionaire, finds his life suddenly upended when his girlfriend, Emily, reveals that she is pregnant. For Richard, the news hits like a bombshell, threatening everything he has worked tirelessly to achieve. He has always believed that career success and social recognition were the paths to true happiness. The idea of becoming a father overwhelms him, not just because of the initial shock, but because it represents an obstacle to the meticulously planned trajectory he has laid out for himself. From an early age, Richard was taught to prioritize work above all else, sacrificing personal moments for the sake of supposed greatness. Being a relentless and dedicated businessman was what was expected of him, and that image had become an essential part of his identity. Yet Emily's pregnancy now jeopardizes all of this, threatening to expose a vulnerability he has never allowed himself to show. Emily, on the other hand, is overcome with a blend of fear and joy at the thought of becoming a mother. When she shares the news with Richard, she expects at least some support, even if hesitant. Instead, she is met with a coldness that pierces through her hopes. Richard reacts with an almost cruel rationality, trying to convince her that having a child right now is a mistake that could ruin everything he has built. He argues that he is not ready to be a father and that the responsibility of raising a child goes far beyond what he is capable of handling at this moment. In truth, what truly drives him is the fear that the image of a high-powered businessman might be tainted by the unexpected arrival of a baby. As the days go by, Richard's anxiety only grows. The idea of his life deviating from the controlled course he has set terrifies him. He begins to withdraw emotionally from Emily, using work as an escape from the reality he refuses to confront. Each time Emily brings up the baby, Richard becomes more distant, his words more cutting, as if trying to build a wall between himself and the consequences of his actions. Emily finds herself increasingly isolated, feeling the weight of rejection not only as a partner, but as the future mother of his child. Her joy begins to turn into heartbreak, as the person she thought would stand by her side is now pushing her away. Eventually, the breaking point arrives. Richard, in a moment of desperate clarity, ends the relationship abruptly, stating that he cannot be the man she needs him to be. He insists that Emily would be better off without him, and that raising a child would be too much of a burden for him to bear. The coldness in his voice hides the turmoil within, as deep down, a part of him is aware that he is making a grave mistake. However, his fear of losing control over his life and career overshadows any feelings of guilt or compassion. With Richard's departure, Emily is left to pick up the pieces of a life that has suddenly fallen apart. In the aftermath of their breakup, Emily is confronted with the harsh reality of single motherhood. The dream of building a family with Richard has shattered, leaving her alone to face the uncertainty of the future. The financial security that once seemed guaranteed is now gone, and she must navigate the challenges ahead without the support she expected. Despite the overwhelming sadness, Emily is determined to move forward. The love she already feels for her unborn child becomes her source of strength, pushing her to confront the difficult journey that awaits. Emily's life quickly becomes a daily struggle as she tries to navigate the challenges of being on her own. With Richard gone, she faces the harsh realities of single motherhood. The financial stability she once took for granted vanishes, leaving her scrambling to make ends meet. The once comfortable life she shared with Richard is replaced by a modest apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, where she has to stretch every dollar just to cover basic needs. As her pregnancy progresses, the physical and emotional toll weighs heavily on her, yet she is determined to provide a future for her child, even if that means doing it alone. Despite her resolve, Emily encounters moments of deep despair. There are nights when the loneliness feels unbearable, and the silence of her small apartment amplifies the absence of the man she once loved. The emotional scars left by Richard's abandonment are raw and deep, and they cut even deeper with each passing day. Yet, in the midst of the sadness, Emily finds small glimmers of hope that keep her moving forward. The kicks of her unborn baby, the signs of life growing inside her, become her anchor. She begins talking to the baby, telling stories of a better future, making promises she isn't sure she can keep, but feels she must make to reassure both herself and her child. Determined to secure a stable life for her baby, Emily begins working multiple part-time jobs. The exhaustion becomes a constant companion, and she feels its effects on her body as she struggles to balance work with prenatal care. She takes on shifts as a cashier, a server, and even works overnight stocking shelves at a local supermarket. Each job brings its own challenges, but it's the mental fatigue that truly tests her limits. The reminder of Richard is always there, lingering like a ghost in the back of her mind as she wonders if he ever thinks about her, or the baby they were supposed to raise together. She battles these thoughts daily, refusing to let herself fall into despair, reminding herself that she has to be strong for the sake of the life she carries. Emily's support network becomes vital during these trying times. She leans on the small community of other single mothers she met through a local church's outreach program. These women, many of whom have faced similar struggles, offer her guidance, a listening ear, and the type of unconditional support that she once believed would come from Richard. They share their own stories of resilience and survival, and in their experiences, Emily finds a source of inspiration. She begins to realize that while the journey ahead is far from easy, she is not entirely alone in it. The kindness and encouragement she receives from these women bolster her, and she starts to see herself not just as a victim of circumstance, but as someone capable of overcoming adversity. As her due date approaches, the reality of giving birth without Richard by her side becomes more daunting. The fantasy she once held of them welcoming their baby together is long gone, replaced by the uncertainty of what awaits her in the delivery room. Despite these fears, Emily refuses to let them overshadow her excitement for the arrival of her child. She prepares as best as she can, attending prenatal classes alone, setting up a small nursery in her apartment with items she's either bought secondhand or received as donations. Each step, however small, feels like a victory, a testament to her resilience. There are moments when she allows herself to dream of a different outcome, where Richard might show up at her door, remorseful and ready to make things right. But she quickly pushes those thoughts away, knowing that counting on his return would only reopen old wounds. The day finally comes when Emily goes into labor. It's a stormy night, and she is rushed to the hospital by one of the women from the support group who had promised to be her emergency contact. The labor is long and arduous, testing Emily's strength in ways she had never imagined. As she brings her child into the world, she is overwhelmed with a mix of emotions: relief, joy, exhaustion, and an immense sense of love for the baby she now holds in her arms. It is in that moment, as she looks at her newborn son, that she feels a surge of pride for all that she has endured. She knows that while the road ahead will still be filled with challenges, she has already proven to herself that she is capable of withstanding whatever comes. A few years have passed, and life has gradually settled into a new rhythm for Emily and her young son, Lucas. She has managed to build a stable, albeit modest life, and while the struggle to make ends meet is still present, there is a sense of hope and growth that drives her forward. Lucas, now a bright and spirited child, has become the center of Emily's world, the very embodiment of the love and strength that have kept her going. The little apartment they share is filled with warmth, laughter, and the bond between a mother and son who have weathered the storm together. Although Emily has moved forward, the shadow of her past still lingers. With Richard existing as nothing more than a distant memory, she rarely allows herself to revisit. One evening, Emily is invited to speak at a charity event organized by a local foundation that helps single mothers. The foundation's work has been instrumental in supporting her through the toughest times, and she now feels a sense of responsibility to give back and share her story as a way to inspire others. As she prepares her speech, she reflects on the long journey she has taken, from the heartbreak of Richard's abandonment to the joy and fulfillment she has found in raising Lucas. She decides to focus not on the pain, but on the resilience and courage it took to build a new life, hoping to convey a message of hope to those in attendance. The night of the event arrives, and the venue is filled with guests, including influential figures and benefactors of the foundation. Emily takes the stage, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. She begins her speech, recounting her story with honesty, allowing the audience a glimpse into her struggles and triumphs. Her words resonate deeply, and as she looks out over the crowd, she sees faces filled with empathy and admiration. But then, in the midst of it all, her eyes lock onto a figure she never expected to see again: Richard. He is seated near the back, his expression a mix of shock and recognition, as though he is seeing a ghost from his past. For a moment, Emily's composure falters, but she quickly regains her focus, determined not to let his presence shake her. Richard's unexpected appearance brings a flood of emotions Emily thought she had long buried. She hadn't seen him since the day he walked out of her life, and now here he was, listening to her speak about the very pain he had caused. As she continues her speech, her voice remains steady, but inside her heart races. She finds herself wondering why he is there, what brought him to this event, and whether he knew she would be speaking. These questions swirl in her mind even as she concludes her talk to a round of applause. The encounter leaves her both rattled and curious, reopening wounds she thought had healed. After the event, as guests mingle and congratulate her on her speech, Emily notices Richard slowly approaching. He seems hesitant, almost as if he doesn't know what to say or how to approach her. When he finally reaches her, there is an awkward silence before he manages to speak, his voice carrying a tone of regret she had never heard before. He tells her that he didn't know she would be there, that his attendance was purely coincidental, as he had recently become a donor for the foundation. The words sound sincere, yet Emily struggles to trust them. She listens, her emotions swirling, anger, sadness, but also a faint curiosity as to what he has become in the years since their separation. Richard's demeanor is different from the man she remembers. There is a softness in his gaze, a humility that hadn't been there before. He tells her that hearing her story was like a wake-up call, a painful reminder of the choices he made and the life he abandoned. He asks about Lucas, not knowing if he even has the right to inquire. His voice cracks as he speaks of the regrets that have haunted him. And for the first time, Emily sees a glimmer of the man she once loved, buried beneath the layers of time and mistakes. Their conversation is brief, but it leaves an indelible mark on both of them. Emily leaves the event with a heavy heart, unsure of what to make of Richard's sudden reappearance in her life. Part of her wants to forget the encounter and move on, but another part, the part that remembers the love they once shared, feels the urge to at least understand why he has come back. As the days go by, she finds herself thinking about him more than she would like, replaying their conversation in her mind, questioning whether his words were genuine or simply an attempt to alleviate his own guilt. In the days following the charity event, Emily finds herself grappling with a mixture of emotions that she can't quite shake. Richard's unexpected presence and his words replay in her mind like an echo she can't silence. His demeanor, so different from the man she remembered, stirs conflicting feelings within her, feelings she thought had been resolved years ago. Though she had told herself she was over him, the truth is more complicated. The encounter brought back not just memories, but a faint stirring of the love she once felt, tangled with the hurt and betrayal he left behind. She had built walls around her heart, but seeing Richard again has caused small cracks to appear, forcing her to confront emotions she wasn't prepared to face. Emily tries to refocus on her daily life, pouring her energy into her work and into caring for Lucas, who remains blissfully unaware of the turmoil that has resurfaced in his mother's life. However, Richard's reappearance feels like an intrusion, an unwelcome disruption to the stability she worked so hard to establish. She finds herself on edge, losing concentration at work, and even feeling restless at night as thoughts of him invade her mind. Questions swirl endlessly. Has he truly changed? Is his regret genuine, or is it simply the weight of guilt catching up to him? She hates herself for even caring. But the truth is undeniable. The past is not as buried as she once believed. Meanwhile, Richard is experiencing his own emotional reckoning. The sight of Emily on that stage, hearing the story of her struggle, has awakened a deep sense of regret that he had long suppressed. It's not just guilt that consumes him, but a profound realization of what he had lost. Not only the woman he once loved, but the chance to be a father to their son. He sees now, in a way that he couldn't before, the selfishness of his decisions and the emptiness of his accomplishments. The success he once prided himself on seems hollow, overshadowed by the absence of a family he never allowed himself to know. For the first time, he allows himself to imagine what life could have been like had he made different choices, had he stayed and faced his fears instead of running from them. Driven by a need to make amends, Richard begins to look for ways to reconnect with Emily and Lucas. He knows that he cannot simply waltz back into their lives, expecting to be forgiven, but he feels compelled to try nonetheless. He starts attending events at the foundation more frequently, hoping to cross paths with Emily again, though not wanting to appear as though he is stalking her. When he does see her again, it's at a fundraiser for single mothers. This time, the meeting is less accidental and more intentional. He approaches her cautiously, aware that he has no right to her time or her forgiveness, but determined to express what he had failed to say years ago. Their conversation is tense at first. Emily's guard is up, and rightfully so, as she questions what he truly wants. Richard's words come slowly, laden with the weight of emotion he struggles to contain. He tells her about the emptiness that followed their separation, how every achievement felt meaningless in the absence of his son's laughter, in the void left by the love he had walked away from. There is no expectation in his voice, only an earnest attempt to be honest and to acknowledge the depth of his mistakes. Emily listens, her skepticism gradually giving way to a cautious curiosity. She sees a man who appears to be confronting his own demons, a side of Richard she had never seen before. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it does make her wonder if there might be something genuine beneath the surface. Richard goes a step further, expressing a desire to meet Lucas, if only from a distance. He understands that any chance to be a part of his son's life is a privilege he doesn't deserve, but he asked for the opportunity nonetheless. Emily is torn. The protective mother in her wants to shut him out, to shield Lucas from the possibility of more pain. But there is another part of her, the part that remembers Richard's better qualities, that hesitates. She decides to leave the door open just a crack, telling him that she will think about it, and that any decisions about Lucas will be made with his well-being as the priority. Richard accepts this answer, understanding that even this small step forward is more than he could have hoped for. In the weeks that follow, Richard begins making gestures to demonstrate his sincerity. He donates to causes Emily cares about, volunteers at the foundation, and even sends a thoughtful gift for Lucas's birthday. Nothing extravagant, just a book about space exploration, something a young boy might find exciting. Emily notices these efforts but remains guarded. She appreciates the thoughtfulness, but she is not yet convinced that Richard's change is more than skin deep. She decides to observe from a distance, to see if his actions continue to align with his words, allowing time to be the judge. As weeks turn into months, Richard's quiet persistence begins to wear down some of the barriers Emily has built. Though she remains cautious, there are moments when she catches herself softening, despite her best efforts to stay guarded. Each time she sees Richard volunteering at the foundation, or hears of his latest contribution to causes that matter to her, she feels a small flicker of something she hasn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. It's a fragile hope, one that she doesn't fully trust yet, but it's there. Challenging the belief that people can never change, she watches him from a distance, observing how he interacts with the other volunteers, how he seems genuinely invested in helping, and she wonders if this is truly the man he has become or if it is all an elaborate attempt to ease his conscience. For Richard, the transformation is real, but not without its struggles. The more he immerses himself in the community, the more he is confronted with reminders of what he lost, especially when he sees fathers with their children. Each interaction brings a painful awareness of the time he has missed with Lucas, the moments he can never reclaim. Yet, it is also these experiences that fuel his determination to keep pushing forward, to keep proving that he is more than his past mistakes. He finds solace in the small victories, like the smiles from the children at the foundation, or the moments when Emily acknowledges his presence with a subtle nod instead of avoiding him completely. These are the signs he clings to, reminders that redemption, however distant, is not entirely out of reach. The first time Emily allows Richard to see Lucas is a carefully controlled situation. She invites him to one of the foundation's family days, where parents and children participate in various activities. It is a public event, offering the safety of a crowd, and it feels like the least risky way to let Richard be near their son. Emily doesn't tell Lucas much in advance, only that a friend will be there who is interested in meeting him. The day arrives and Lucas, with the unfiltered curiosity of a child, immediately takes to Richard. They bond over a shared interest in space and rockets, and Richard's choice of gift from weeks before now feels prophetic. Emily watches from a distance, her heart in her throat as she sees Richard kneel down to Lucas's level, speaking to him with a warmth she hadn't seen in years. There is a vulnerability in Richard's eyes that makes her want to believe he truly cares, that this is not just about easing his own guilt. As the day progresses, Richard takes great care not to overstep any boundaries. He lets Lucas set the pace, never pushing too hard or asking questions that might confuse the boy. When they work together to build a model rocket during one of the activities, Richard allows Lucas to take the lead, only offering help when asked. It is a small gesture, but it doesn't go unnoticed by Emily. She sees the restraint in his actions, the way he is letting Lucas come to him rather than trying to force a connection. It is a sign of growth, of understanding the delicacy of the situation, and it stirs a quiet appreciation within her. The first encounter goes well enough that Emily begins to consider the possibility of more regular visits. She is still not sure if Richard is ready for the full responsibilities of fatherhood, but she cannot deny the joy she saw on Lucas's face during the event. For the boy's sake, if nothing else, she feels it is worth exploring this fragile new dynamic, even if it means exposing herself to the risk of being hurt again. Her protective instincts remain strong, yet the sight of her son laughing and playing with Richard is something she hasn't been able to provide alone. It is a kind of happiness she didn't realize Lucas was missing, and it plants a seed of doubt in her previous certainty that keeping Richard at arm's length was the right thing to do. Richard, for his part, is overwhelmed by the experience. The day at the foundation marks the first time he has been able to truly feel like a father, even if only for a few hours. The reality of what he has missed hits him with full force, yet there is also a glimmer of hope that perhaps it isn't too late to build something meaningful with his son. He is careful not to pressure Emily for more time, understanding that any steps forward must be taken slowly. But inside he feels an urgency, a desire to make up for lost time, to prove not just to Emily but to himself that he can be the father Lucas deserves. Over the next few weeks, Richard continues to see Lucas in similarly structured settings, always under Emily's watchful eye. Each visit brings them a little closer, with Lucas gradually becoming more comfortable in Richard's presence. There are moments of hesitation, but also moments of genuine connection. A shared laugh, a spontaneous hug, or the way Lucas's eyes light up when Richard arrives. These interactions do not erase the years of absence, but they begin to build something new. A bond that, while still fragile, is slowly gaining strength. As Richard continues to build a relationship with Lucas, he finds himself experiencing a deeper sense of fulfillment than he ever had in his professional life. The small, everyday moments, helping Lucas with a school project, attending a soccer game, or simply spending an afternoon at the park, begin to fill a void in Richard that he hadn't fully understood existed. Each time Lucas calls him Dad, the word feels both precious and unfamiliar, as if he is learning its meaning all over again. Yet beneath the joy there is a persistent undercurrent of anxiety. Richard is acutely aware that, despite the progress he has made, he is still on probation in Emily's eyes, and he hasn't fully earned the trust of his son. This reality weighs heavily on him, making every moment feel like both a gift and a test. Emily's reservations have not completely dissolved. She continues to evaluate Richard's actions closely, always mindful of the impact this renewed relationship could have on Lucas if things were to go wrong. Her own emotions are conflicted. There are days when she catches herself smiling at the sight of Richard and Lucas together, feeling a warmth she hasn't known in years. But then there are moments of fear and doubt that creep in, reminding her of the betrayal she once endured. She is torn between the desire to allow herself and Lucas to embrace this new version of Richard and the instinct to shield her son from the risk of future disappointment. Her own healing is tied to Richard's redemption, and that truth is not lost on her. One evening, as Richard is preparing to leave after spending the day with Lucas, Emily pulls him aside. She speaks with a calmness that belies the weight of her words, telling him that while she appreciates the changes she has seen in him, there is still a part of her that struggles to forgive him. It is not just about the time he missed or the years of hardship she endured on her own, but about the way he shattered her trust so thoroughly that even now, it feels fragile. Richard listens, his expression solemn, knowing that he cannot argue against her feelings. He acknowledges that he has no right to ask for forgiveness, and that all he can do is continue to show through his actions that he is committed to being there, no matter how long it takes. His sincerity is evident, and though Emily doesn't offer any promises, her willingness to share this with him feels like a step forward. In the weeks that follow, A new kind of tension emerges, one that is driven by Richard's growing impatience with himself. The weight of his mistakes seems to grow heavier the closer he becomes to Lucas, and the more he begins to grasp the full scope of what he had missed. There is a particular moment, a simple one, that brings this realization crashing down on him. It happens when he is helping Lucas with a math problem. As they sit together at the kitchen table, Richard notices a habit Lucas has of biting his lip when he's concentrating, a habit that Emily later tells him Lucas has had since he was a toddler. The realization strikes Richard with an almost physical force. There are countless little details about his son's life that he will never know, things that can't be made up for, no matter how present he is now. It is a heartbreaking understanding, one that reinforces the notion that while he may be able to build a future with his son, he will never be able to reclaim the past. This awareness begins to seep into Richard's interactions with Emily as well. She notices a shift in him, moments when he seems lost in thought, or when he looks at Lucas with a mixture of joy and sadness. One night, as they sit on the porch after Lucas has gone to bed, Emily asks Richard what's been weighing on him. He hesitates at first, but then confides in her, admitting that the closer he becomes to Lucas, the more acutely he feels the pain of his absence during the early years. It's not just guilt, he explains, but a profound regret for the memories that never were, for the milestones he wasn't there to witness. As he speaks, Emily feels a pang of empathy that surprises her. She sees the vulnerability in his eyes, the same vulnerability that once drew her to him, and she realizes that his struggle for redemption is not just for Lucas, or even for her, but also for himself. Emily's response is unexpected, even to herself. She reaches out and places a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture that carries with it a sense of understanding. She tells him that while the past cannot be undone, it doesn't have to define the future. Her words are not a declaration of forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of the effort Richard has put forth and the sincerity behind it. It is the closest she has come to expressing any kind of approval since he came back into their lives. And though it is not quite enough to ease Richard's burden, it does lighten it, if only for a moment. As they continue to navigate this complicated path toward healing, the relationship between Richard and Emily shifts subtly. There is a renewed sense of familiarity between them, not the same as before, but something new that has been shaped by both the love they once shared and the wounds they have endured. For Emily, it is a cautious hope that perhaps redemption is not only possible for Richard, but for herself as well, an opportunity to finally let go of the anger that has held her captive. For Richard, it is a chance to be more than the sum of his failures, to build a life that reflects the man he is striving to become, rather than the man he used to be. As time passes, the delicate balance Richard and Emily have been working to maintain starts to show signs of strain. Richard's commitment to Lucas remains steadfast, and his bond with his son continues to grow stronger with each passing day. However, the weight of his unresolved guilt begins to manifest in more profound ways. He finds himself overcompensating during his time with Lucas, trying to be perfect in every moment as if to make up for all the years he missed. Richard doesn't allow himself to show frustration or fatigue, always eager to prove that he can be the father Lucas deserves. But the constant pressure starts to take a toll on him, even if he doesn't yet realize it. Emily, too, senses the shift. She notices how Richard seems to be pushing himself beyond his limits, and it concerns her. The fear that he is trying too hard, setting unrealistic expectations for himself, lingers in the back of her mind. She appreciates his dedication, but there is a part of her that wonders if this relentless pursuit of redemption is sustainable. She doesn't want Lucas to become attached to a version of his father who is driven by guilt rather than genuine joy. The strain begins to show in small ways. Richard's tired eyes, the occasional distant look when he thinks no one is watching, or the uncharacteristic moments of silence when he struggles to keep his emotions in check. The situation reaches a breaking point one evening when Richard takes Lucas to a local fair. It's supposed to be a carefree night, filled with rides and laughter, but something shifts as they walk through the crowded fairground. Richard becomes increasingly tense, and Lucas, sensing his father's anxiety, grows quiet. The pressure Richard has been putting on himself begins to unravel, and when Lucas accidentally drops his ice cream cone and starts to cry, Richard's patience snaps. He raises his voice, not in anger, but in frustration, telling Lucas it's just ice cream and that he should stop crying. The look of hurt and confusion on his son's face hits Richard like a punch to the gut. He immediately regrets his outburst, but the damage is done. Lucas pulls away, his small hand slipping from Richard's grasp as he turns his back and runs toward Emily, who had been walking a few steps behind. Emily quickly kneels down to comfort Lucas, her eyes flashing with a mixture of concern and disappointment as she glances up at Richard. It's a moment that brings everything into sharp focus: the fragile trust that had been built, the emotional tightrope Richard has been walking, and the undeniable fact that despite his efforts, he is still deeply flawed. She sees the devastation on his face as he realizes the impact of his words, and for a brief moment, she feels a resurgence of the old anger, the reminder of why she had been so hesitant to let him back into their lives. Later that night, after Lucas has gone to bed, Emily finds Richard sitting on the porch, his head in his hands. There's a heavy silence between them as she sits beside him, neither of them knowing quite what to say. Finally, Richard speaks, his voice low and unsteady as he admits that he feels like he's failing all over again. He confesses that the closer he gets to Lucas, the more terrified he becomes of letting him down. The weight of his past mistakes feels like a shadow that never leaves, no matter how hard he tries to move forward. As he talks, his vulnerability is laid bare, and Emily can see the deep cracks in his self-assurance. He is not the man who left them all those years ago, but he is also not yet the man he wants to be. Emily listens, her initial frustration softening as she hears the sincerity in Richard's voice. She doesn't offer any empty reassurances, knowing that words alone cannot heal wounds this deep. Instead, she tells him that it's okay not to be perfect, that Lucas doesn't need a flawless father, he just needs a present one. Her words are simple, but they hold a profound truth that strikes Richard at his core. For so long, he has been chasing an ideal, trying to atone for his absence by being everything he wasn't before. But Emily's reminder allows him to see that what Lucas needs is not perfection, but authenticity. It is a humbling realization, one that leaves Richard feeling both exposed and strangely relieved. In the days that follow, Richard begins to approach his time with Lucas differently. He stops trying to fill every moment with grand gestures or planned activities. Instead, he allows space for the simple things, quiet moments of playing in the yard, reading together before bed, or just talking about Lucas's day. There are still mistakes and moments of uncertainty, but Richard starts to accept that this is part of the journey. The bond between father and son continues to grow, not because of Richard's attempts to be perfect, but because of his willingness to be present, even when it's hard. In the weeks that follow Richard's breaking point, the atmosphere between him, Emily, and Lucas shifts subtly but significantly. The vulnerability Richard showed on the porch, coupled with his decision to stop chasing perfection, has opened a door Emily didn't even realize had been closed. Though she remains cautious, there is a quiet willingness in her now to see him for who he truly is, rather than who she fears he might still be. The distance between them, once defined by unspoken pain and resentment, begins to diminish. Richard's authenticity, the humility with which he admits his flaws, touches Emily in a way that years of careful behavior never could. Richard continues to approach fatherhood with a newfound acceptance of his imperfections. Instead of trying to force moments with Lucas, he allows their relationship to develop organically, taking joy in the little things, the laughter over shared jokes, Lucas's excitement when he learns something new, or even the quiet moments of just sitting together. He learns to apologize when he falters, understanding that acknowledging his mistakes is not a sign of weakness, but a way to teach Lucas about resilience and growth. The more time they spend together, the more Richard sees glimpses of himself in his son, not just in physical traits, but in Lucas's mannerisms, his curiosity, and even his stubbornness. These realizations deepen Richard's connection to Lucas, not because they make him feel more like a father, but because they help him see the boy as a person with his own strengths and struggles, independent of Richard's past. Meanwhile, Emily grapples with her own emotions. Seeing Richard evolve into a more genuine version of himself stirs memories of the man she once fell in love with. She finds herself in moments where the lines between past and present blur. When Richard makes her laugh, when he speaks to Lucas with such tenderness that it takes her breath away, or when they find themselves reminiscing about shared experiences from long ago. It's not that the hurt has vanished. There are still days when the old wounds ache, reminding her of the risks of letting Richard back in. But the man standing before her now is not the same one who walked away years ago, and for the first time, Emily begins to consider the possibility of forgiveness, not just for Richard, but for herself. One afternoon, as they are packing up after a day at the park, Lucas runs to Emily holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he picked. He proudly announces that they are for her and for Daddy, the word rolling off his tongue naturally, as if it had always been part of his vocabulary. Emily feels her heart skip a beat, not because Lucas called Richard Daddy, a title he has started using more frequently, but because of the way Richard reacts. He doesn't try to make it a momentous occasion or draw attention to the significance of the word. Instead, he simply smiles and thanks Lucas, his eyes meeting Emily's in a quiet acknowledgement of the progress they've made. There is a shared understanding between them in that moment, a recognition that while the path has been far from easy, they are indeed moving forward. The following weekend, Emily decides to take a step she had not yet dared to consider. She invites Richard to join her and Lucas for dinner at her home. It is not the first time they have shared a meal, but it is the first time she has welcomed him into the space that has been exclusively hers and Lucas's for so long. As they sit around the table, the atmosphere is relaxed, almost familiar. Conversation flows easily, with Lucas animatedly sharing stories from school, and Emily and Richard exchanging glances that carry an unspoken gratitude for the simplicity of the moment. It feels natural, as if they are just a family having dinner, and that realization is both comforting and terrifying for Emily. The ease of it all brings her closer to the edge of forgiveness, but there is still a part of her that hesitates, afraid that by forgiving Richard, she is somehow erasing the pain she endured. As the night draws to a close, Richard stays behind to help Emily clean up. They work in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when words are unnecessary. When the last dish is dried and put away, Richard turns to her, his expression serious but soft. He thanks her for inviting him, for allowing him to be part of Lucas's life, and for being patient with him as he struggled to find his place. Emily listens, feeling a knot form in her throat. She wants to tell him that she is grateful too, that his persistence has helped her heal in ways she didn't know were possible. But the words stick. Instead, she steps closer, and in an impulsive moment, she wraps her arms around him in a tentative embrace. Richard hesitates only for a second before returning the gesture, holding her gently, as if afraid that moving too quickly might break whatever fragile understanding is forming between them. The embrace doesn't last long, but it marks a turning point. When Emily pulls away, there is a sense of something unspoken having shifted between them, as if a layer of the past has finally been shed. Richard's eyes search hers, and for the first time there is no need for words. They both know that this is not about rekindling an old romance, but about building something new from the ashes of what once was. It is a beginning, not of a relationship, but of forgiveness. Slow, imperfect, and fragile, but real. As Richard becomes a more permanent fixture in their lives, the lines between the past and the present blur even further for Emily. There are days when it feels as though Richard has always been there, when the naturalness of their interactions almost makes her forget the years they spent apart. But then there are moments when the scars left by his departure throb painfully, reminding her that while time may heal, it doesn't erase. Still, it's becoming harder to ignore the warmth that blossoms in her chest whenever she sees Richard and Lucas together. The way they've grown close with an ease that feels both miraculous and deserved. The connection they've formed, forged through patience and hard work, is undeniable, and Emily can't help but wonder if it's time to let go of the last remnants of her resentment and allow herself to believe in the possibility of a second chance, not just for Richard, but for herself. Richard, too, is grappling with the weight of this new beginning. Though the progress he's made with Lucas fills him with a quiet joy, there is a part of him that remains haunted by the fear that he could still somehow ruin everything. His history with Emily looms over him like a shadow, a reminder of the man he used to be. And though he is determined not to repeat his mistakes, the doubt that lingers in his heart is difficult to shake. He finds himself questioning whether he truly deserves this second chance, whether he can be the man Emily and Lucas need him to be. Each day feels like a delicate balancing act, and while he tries not to show it, the strain of his internal struggle is evident in his moments of hesitation and the way his eyes cloud with worry whenever he thinks no one is watching. The opportunity to confront these lingering doubts presents itself one evening when Richard and Emily take Lucas to the beach. It's a spontaneous decision, one made on a whim when Lucas, full of energy and excitement, suggests they go watch the sunset. As they walk along the shore, with the cool sand beneath their feet and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the rocks, there is a sense of peace that settles over them. Lucas runs ahead, laughing as he chases seagulls and splashes in the shallow water, leaving Richard and Emily to stroll side by side in a rare moment of quiet. For a time, they simply walk in silence, enjoying the serenity of the evening. But then, as the sun dips lower on the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Richard speaks. His voice is low and hesitant as he tells Emily that there are things he needs to say, things he should have said long ago. He admits that even now, with everything seemingly falling into place, he is terrified of not being enough, of not living up to the second chance he's been given. He tells her about the guilt that still gnaws at him, the fear that someday Lucas might look at him and see only the man who wasn't there when he was needed most. As he speaks, Richard's words spill out with an intensity that surprises even him, and Emily can hear the rawness in his voice, the weight of years of self-doubt and regret. It's the most open and vulnerable he's ever been, and for the first time she sees just how deeply he's been carrying the burden of his past. Emily stops walking and turns to face him, her expression a mixture of empathy and something deeper, something like understanding. She tells Richard that while his fears are valid, they don't define him. What defines him is the person he has chosen to become. She explains that forgiveness isn't about pretending the past didn't happen, but about accepting it and finding a way to move forward. Her words are gentle but firm, and they resonate with a truth that reaches Richard's very core. For a moment, neither of them speaks, and then Emily takes his hand, squeezing it lightly. It's a small gesture, but the significance of it is not lost on Richard. It feels like acceptance, not just of him, but of the possibility that they could truly leave the past behind. As they stand there, the world around them bathed in the fading light of the setting sun, Richard feels something inside him begin to shift. It's as though a weight has been lifted, a weight he hadn't even realized was still pressing down on him. He looks at Emily, and in her eyes, he sees not just the woman he once loved and hurt, but a person who has grown and changed as much as he has. It's a profound moment of recognition, one that carries with it a quiet promise, that while they cannot change what came before, they can build something new, something real and honest, from the ground up. Lucas's voice breaks the silence, calling them to join him as he digs in the sand, and the spell of the moment is gently broken. But as Richard and Emily walk over to where their son is playing, there is a new lightness in their steps. It's as though in that moment by the sea they have finally let go of the ghosts of the past, allowing themselves to embrace not just the second chance they've been given, but the freedom to hope for a future that isn't defined by past mistakes. Months pass, and life settles into a new kind of normal for Richard, Emily, and Lucas. The journey to get here has been anything but straightforward, marked by setbacks and small triumphs, but the changes are undeniable. There's a sense of peace now, the kind that comes not from perfection, but from accepting the imperfections. Richard no longer feels the need to prove himself constantly. The moments he shares with Lucas are no longer tinged with the urgency of redemption, but rather filled with the simple joy of being together. Whether it's coaching Lucas at a soccer game, helping with homework, or just laughing over dinner, Richard is present in a way he never was before, not because he's trying to be the perfect father, but because he's finally learned to just be. Emily, too, feels a shift within herself. The cautious hope that had once lived in the shadow of her skepticism has grown into something stronger. Forgiveness has come slowly, like the turning of a season, but with it has come a lightness she hadn't realized she was missing. Her heart, once guarded so tightly, has begun to open, and for the first time, she allows herself to envision a future where she and Richard are not just co-parents, but partners. It's not a decision she made overnight. It's the culmination of every small step they've taken together, every difficult conversation, and every quiet moment of trust rebuilt. She hasn't forgotten the pain, but it no longer controls her, and that freedom feels like a gift she is finally ready to embrace. The idea of rekindling their relationship is one they both approach with caution. Richard understands that the last thing Emily needs is pressure, and Emily knows that this second chance, if pursued, must be taken one day at a time. But the signs of their growing closeness are there, unmistakable in the way they share glances that linger a little too long, the way they sometimes find themselves lost in conversation well after Lucas has gone to bed. It's in the gentle touches, the hand on the shoulder, the way Emily's laughter comes more easily in Richard's presence, and the way he looks at her with an expression that holds a depth of love and regret in equal measure. One evening, after a family dinner, they find themselves alone in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side. The silence between them is not uncomfortable, but it is charged with the unspoken. Finally, Richard turns to Emily, his voice soft and tentative. He tells her that whatever happens, he is grateful for the chance to be a father to Lucas and for the opportunity to rebuild what they once had. He doesn't ask for promises or guarantees, only that they continue moving forward together, at whatever pace feels right for her. Emily listens, her eyes searching his face, and she sees not the man who once walked away, but the man who has worked so tirelessly to find his way back. In that moment, Emily steps closer, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. She takes Richard's hand in hers and looks up at him, her voice steady as she tells him that she wants to try again. Not just for Lucas, but for themselves. She admits that there will be no rushing back into what they once were, that they will need to build something new from the ground up, and that it may take time. But she is ready to take that step, to give herself permission to hope again, and to see where this second chance might lead. Richard pulls her into an embrace, holding her tightly, and for the first time in years, Emily feels completely unburdened. They stand there, wrapped in each other's arms, with the quiet understanding that this is not an ending, but the beginning of something entirely new. As they pull back slightly, Richard kisses her, not with urgency, but with a tenderness that speaks of all the years lost and all the ones they hope to reclaim. Over the following months, they take things slowly. There are challenges, as there always will be, but they face them together, not as people trying to patch up old wounds, but as partners building a new life. They establish new traditions as a family: weekend trips to the beach, movie nights, and quiet mornings spent together. For Lucas, the transformation is seamless, his joy at having both his parents in his life a constant reminder of what they have achieved. He becomes the glue that binds them, but their bond extends beyond him, rooted now in shared growth and a love that has been tested and found stronger than before. As time goes on, Richard and Emily find themselves planning for the future in a way that feels natural, not forced. There is talk of moving to a bigger house, of vacations, and even of expanding their family. It's not about erasing the past, but about weaving it into the fabric of their present, allowing it to inform who they have become without letting it dictate what they can be. They have come full circle, not to the same place they started, but to somewhere entirely different, somewhere earned through every difficult moment and every decision to keep moving forward, even when it seemed impossible. Thank you for watching until the end. We hope this story touched your heart. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share the story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional and inspiring stories. Stay tuned for more content that moves and inspires.